Alright. We managed to pass the baptism of fire, I guess. So
So
let's check
going back,
in.
going back to what I was talking about in the previous part here, believe it or not, what this game started off as was, well, a racing game, or more specifically, a vehicle combat game, similar
yeah,
to
that's what they
Twisted
said.
Metal.
Also in Ratchet and Clank 3.
Well, yes, it's just what I'm getting at is like the development of this game here. It changed because, well, yeah, as
Jack
Joe may have
X
mentioned,
after.
yeah, Jack X. So then you'd think they went to this? No, actually. What they changed it into was a title called Ratchet and Clank Nexus. Not to be confused with the actual Into the Nexus game, but
Which is
basically
interesting
what-
because in some countries that game actually is indeed called Ratchet and Clank Nexus. So
cute. But yeah, what was going to happen was that Ratchet and Clank would be on a planet. This wouldn't be an entire galaxy for once, but it would be in the midst of a conflict between, two alien races. Sound familiar? Which in turn would, lead to things. Well, it would lead from one thing to another, essentially, and we'd have apparently some in-depth talks on the different views that the sides would have on things. Yes, very adult and political stuff. However, eventually it would take once again another turn when they decided to go for a darker element, this time inspired primarily by Halo, in which case, yes, we eventually got Deadlocked. I can't entirely blame them because Halo is one of the gigantic gaming phenomenons of all times. Like, it in and of itself justified Microsoft's hat in the ring, that being the Xbox essentially. It was like big. It was to the point where people were using the phrase, let's play Xbox, because Xbox was considered that big thanks to Halo.
It's a beautiful spring day on Catacrom for Juanita as we kick off a brand new season of DreadZone.
That's right, Dallas, and we're lucky enough to have a bird's eye view of the action.
Even from up here, this season's DreadZone battle courses look bigger and deadlier than ever.
It's a wonder contestants keep volunteering, isn't it?
They will all gruesomely die. Also
touching her
back
before
up.
she tells you to
Really
stop,
outdid themselves
please.
in turning this once
Seriously,
sacred
was he
robotic
meant to be a
burial
Chris
ground
Tucker
into a
parody?
deadly
The more I
DreadZone
see of him, the more I wonder.
I don't know, but I can tell, yes, every single thing, joke that you can think of about work environment where someone gets a bit too touchy, yes, it's done here, which is something that I haven't really mentioned before. This I argue, oh god, this is the game that has the worst age jokes in total of the original saga, if you ask me.
yeah.
Again, like I said, there might have been a couple of duds in the original trilogy, I'm willing to admit that, but I argue the overall product still manages to result, with a very solid type of comedy that it can still be enjoyed to this day. I like the sensation on TV and gladiatorial combat, especially the angle about, forced merchandising that doesn't work, which, in hindsight, this game is absurdly hilarious towards specifically what Ace Harlight's story arc goes about the fact that he's being pushed by the company as this big next thing that by all accounts is engineer that should be actually selling but is not, eventually has to be taken down by Ratchet, obviously, and also by interface. Again, considering the state of, Sony's program with games as a service, this is poignant to say the least.
Yeah.
But,
I do have to state a thing I'm a bit surprised by, though. In spite of this game being received positively, in spite of it receiving big sales, Insomniac were not forced to stick with this direction, which is interesting. Typically, when a success like this happens, you expect that the big higher-ups will go, see, now this is the future, and will force them to go on that direction.
That was because the PS3 was around the corner, and instead, in order to, continue the initiative that all major PlayStation studios were going to shift gears or something that was supposedly, taking advantage of a new hardware, they were instead developing Resistance. Yes, a Ratchet & Clank game arrived not too long after, so they were still working on that. but that wasn't their priority, basically, at the beginning, at the very least. Zombie robots, yes, of course. No, again, the reason why this game had success back then, Jova, despite everything, is because, again, like I also said in the first part, the gameplay is still relatively solid as a game on its own, as a shooter arena on its own, you know. If you played something like Quake, you know, or Unreal Tournament, you know exactly what this kind of thing is, even beyond, you know, Halo. Because, again, what Halo did was nothing that was technically new. It just, you know, basically said it's actually cool to have it for consoles and not just PC. Also, God, the frame rate.
Again, I'm pretty sure that did not happen in the original PS2 version, but yeah.
But, so this is not... So the reason why it was still successful is because it attracted, you know, the dude bro, you know, crowd. Again, it's probably part of that also, you know, wave of... the wave of the narrative that was being pushed during the late years of the PS2. That Catacrom talked about in his review of the PlayStation magazine. The whole thing that, as a general thought, PlayStation was actually marketed to be the cool console, you know, that not kids could just, you know, enjoy, but also, you know, the lads. So as a result, also, there was the general push for more mature games. This is why the early God of War games managed to be incredibly successful, and why even third-party companies managed to, you know, struggle with that kind of idea, like with Capcom with Devil May Cry, for example, you know. So I get the idea this is also a byproduct of that, you know, yeah, this is not your daddy's, you know, Ratchet and Clank, this is cool shit now, because it is, you know, too edgy for your armor, and he's fighting for his life, he has a explosive color, because Battle Royale, you know, is the manga and the Takeshi Miike, you know, movie is super popular around this time, you know.
I'll admit, while as a kid I found the story of this game kind of boring, especially compared to the previous ones, I did thoroughly enjoy the gameplay, which, yeah, I think that's the best trajectory to say with the fans. The fans, at worst, did grumble at how this game was a change to it, but honestly, it was arguably a game that was only gonna be really in trouble with the most hardcore of Ratchet and Clank fans, like, you know, the type who wanted absolutely Ratchet and Clank. Like, even casual Ratchet fans can probably enjoy this still overall.
Well, yeah, like I said, I surprisingly even managed to platinum this when I actually, you know, properly recorded this, and I was actually not hoping, I've actually had, you know, not hope for doing that. I was like, okay, I'm gonna play to show the extras and be done with this thing. But no, I actually did manage to, you know, achieve the completion. But the thing is that, like I said, even the story, again, it's not the most Shakespearean thing, and definitely a downgrade compared to 3. But it's a perfectly self-contained episode that doesn't really harm anything, you know. This is just a thing that happens. You know already that by the end of this game, Ratchet and Clank will actually already get free. The entire point of this is that right now they're playing ball for Gleeman, participating in the games, but they want to secretly try to get out of this and possibly, you know, dismantle this operation. You know, so it's not like what's gonna be the status quo, thank God. Anyway, also
the irony.
More vehicle section, and doesn't this look familiar? Yes, this was the basis for the Goliath from the Resistance games. Well, both the Goliath and the Stalker. More the Stalker technically, but the quadrupedal walk is also be similar to the Goliath.
Yep. Also, you know, just to mention, the other thing that they were doing in 2005 was Ratchet and Clank going mobile. Get this, it's a platformer shooter mobile game about Ratchet and Clank being transported into a cell phone.
Yeah, because it was a Java game. You have to understand, audience, that it was the case of, when saying cell phone games, it's not about an app for a smartphone like you would think immediately now. But, you know, properly Java. Back then, because I did play a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot, there was this kind of a craze that a lot of third-party titles, particularly, but also a couple of these, were actually initially either ports or new original games specifically for the Java market in order to take advantage of the market. The Catacroms talk about these when we cover the Crash mobile games, you know. And I had to disagree with him on the quality. I don't really think a lot of them were bad. Basically, I played, I believe it or not, I played a Sonic port of that, a port of Sonic 1, which probably is technically worse than Sonic Genesis, but I did enjoy it for what it was worth. There was one about Rayman.
Wait. A port of Sonic 1 that's worse than Sonic Genesis?
Mostly because, again, Java, so it lagged constantly.
Oh!
Anyway,
Okay.
there was a Rayman one, I forgot which specific one was. There was one of the Crash racing games. And then there was stuff like Prince of Persia, the 2 Pros, which actually, believe it or not, used the original plot that was discarded from the game. So you do get to fight the Dark Prince at the end of that. And so again, my point to say, I think that there was the potential in those, and as a result, a lot of the companies wanted to have a big piece of the pie of the market of that. So, believe it or not, there's even a God of War game titled Java. Even I didn't play it, it's called God of War Betrayal. So it's not too surprising to me that Sony actually had a couple of titles specifically for that market. I don't even think it's emulatable, so, you know, top chance of us covering that. But it's a nice, you know, knowing that.
The thing
As
about
for me-
Java games, ironically, that helped them out was cell phones back in the day had actual buttons that you could press. Part of the reason that some mobile games had to be simplified for smartphones is, well, touchscreens. Touchscreens are not always ideal for doing what, you know, games usually play with a controller would do.
Yes, Pedro?
As for me, when it comes to this game, I actually this is the Ratchet and Clank game that I played the least back in the day because I personally didn't care much for the changing gameplay and the tone, and I didn't care for the tone, honestly.
I wouldn't.
Yeah,
I'm
like-
not. I guess I will have to call it the worst game, even if for me at least it still works on a gameplay alone, you know. But overall, the sum of the parts, I still probably have to play all for 1 and 2 Contra Assault. So I don't know. Maybe those will be, you know, technically worse than that.
You're mentioning the Java games, and who could forget those wonderful MIDI remixes of some songs like.
Well, a lot of them.
I mean, sometimes
a lot
some-
of them were not even present with. Most of them were about having sound effects and the other compartments.
Yeah, like.
And to give them credit, sometimes the MIDI versions of the songs were the charm of it since it was on a little phone.
Although, to be honest, the one Java game I actually remember playing is the Java version of Deal or No Deal.
There was one
The
about
British one, obviously.
There was a version of that of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, in case you're wondering. With but the one game that I would actually put, you know, consider super sacred on that regard, to the point, and I'm not alone because it even eventually received a Nintendo DS port. Yes, a Java game got a Nintendo DS port. Is a dungeon crawler called Orcs and Elves. It's published by EA, so good luck seeing that, you know, in the future. It was particularly charmed. It had actually surprisingly decent amount of writing, you know, and the gameplay was not so bad. The developers even made dungeon crawling RPG equivalent for also Doom and Wolfenstein, believe it or not. Anyway, if you noticed the composition of the structure, when you go to a planet, you do a set of micro missions, and after you're done with that, with those, you have to complete potentially optional ones in order to. The goal is to gather medals and points in order to basically raise your rank, you know, in the slaughterhouse. And yes, you also have Return of the Hoverbike. It's more doable than in the second game because you control more of the speed, as you can see, but you have to fly through rings. Lovely.
The staple of any amazing video
God
game.
fucking damn it.
Then there is no time to waste.
Thank you, Clank. We totally needed that. I won.
But yeah, no. From what I've seen nowadays, Ratchet and Clank fans are, at worst, meh. about this game. Most seem to have accepted it. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The reason they're more accepting of it is because A, this was not the identity that the series went on for the future, and B, thankfully this series did not kill the franchise. I always say, one thing that a stigma of almost any game that kind of is the end of a series is it'll be seen as the series killer unless the creators wanted out of a series or they made it clear that this was meant to be the conclusion. Look at, say, Crash Mind Over Mutant. And I know some will say it's not like that now, but no, I remember Crash Mind Over Mutant was hated. And don't get me wrong, I don't think it's good either, but one can even argue it was maybe overhated, but rightfully so because for, gosh, over half a decade, that was it for Crash. In fact, nearly a decade. Crash didn't come back until like
the early PS4.
2016.
Yeah, not even the early, like say the midlife of the PS4 cycle.
And Mind Over Mutant was 2008, so
And mind
yeah,
you, the Insane Trilogy was something that Sony asked Activision to as a sort of a commission, as now we know, basically. So Bobby Kotick was not giving a single shit about that.
like, now the thing to consider about Mind Over Mutant is, like I said, it's not good. And, well, if it didn't sell well, even though apparently it did sell well enough, but it probably did not sell gangbusters because by that point a lot of people were burnt out with Crash games that played kind of nothing like Crash. Like, ironically, the DS version of Crash of the Titans plays more like Crash Bandicoot proper than the actual console versions did. And as you can imagine, the console versions were the ones mainly on display here and there. Like, I guess Deadlocked kind of feels like the series' own Crash of the Titans, except at least the gameplay feels fun throughout. Now, that's a bit subjective with Crash of the Titans, but man, Crash of the Titans was a major departure from Crash's. Like, just to put things into perspective, Crash can get dizzy from spinning in Crash of the Titans, which is
also not just
heresy.
that. There might be even the occasion where the creators want to kill the franchise, and still manage to produce something that is still relatively good in gameplay. Like again the original Crash Team Racing. By their own admission, even if it sounds something that is not particularly ethical in terms of work environment, Naughty Dog, the entire reason why they made nitrous oxide was because they wanted to make the game so outlandish that the franchise would have been burned after they were gone. That's just no. Why would you do that?
And in addition to that, yes, it's confirmed. I just wonder, what was their logic? Oh yes, if we make a racing game, that will totally make people mad enough to abandon the series.
That feels spiteful because Universal now it's keeping the game, and you cannot make that anymore. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, like Naughty Dog were a great dev team, but I'll save
our talk maybe if we ever get to the Jack games. Also, my God, these so many zombies that are destroying the frame rate.
Dead Rising, this is not.
If I recall correctly, you do get an achievement, not an achievement, sorry, but a skill point if you destroy potentially some of the cameras. I forgot. I did manage to get the most of the skill points in these, and these are possibly more hard than the ones are from free. So this is where it starts to get a bit too much puzzle the one the matter. But thankfully, for the purpose of a platinum, you should be fine with what you get.
Also, given the darker tone, how much you want to bet there's a draft where these zombies are actually biological instead of robots?
Instead they pull Carmageddon, censored, and they had to change the blood. I don't know.
Who knows?
What's the rating of this game, actually? I don't know about that.
T.
So, no, okay. What does it take for having blood and still have a T rating?
Typically
blood.
Okay, so this case, basically.
As shown by Shadow the Hedgehog, yeah.
Okay, so here's the deal when it comes to T-rated stuff here. Typically, a bit of blood splatters and whatnot, you get your T. What makes it M is when apparently you get graphic with the blood. Ergo, apparently the bloody cutscenes in Dual Destinies were considered bloody enough to bump it up to an M rating.
Although apparently
it's now
not
back to-
anymore.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have to talk
Again,
about that
that's
at a later
as
time.
usual. The SRB uses logic that makes no fucking sense when you get down to it. See you for the next part when we get to Sarthos.
See ya.
Yeah.